suggested that one way he could solve that problem was, again, the retirement community, assisted living. Assisted living. He would trade space, a small apartment for his lovely 3-bedroom house, for privacy. There would be no one in his apartment 24/7. But help was just outside the door if he needed it. He said no. He didn't get angry this time, and I didn't push it. Finally, I'm going to say he was one of my oldest, and certainly in some ways the closest friend I ever had. We could and did discuss all those so-called hot-button issues that friends go to watch. Like politics. Well, obviously we're in politics. But religion. At the end, he opened up a little bit. Oh, he was not a great believer. I knew he wouldn't have went to church. Grace and I have been practicing Catholics all our lives. It didn't bother him. He had some belief in the supreme being. But on many things, he was an agnostic. He was open about it. We talked about it. And at the end, this past year or two, we swapped stories on our finances. I knew what his portfolio looked like, not in great detail, but I how big it was. He asked me about it when he was worried about his finances with his caretakers around the clock. They were expensive. And I acted as a liaison once or twice between him and his financial advisor at Merrill Lynch. And I asked the advisor to set up for him a fairly simple outline of what his assets looked like and what his income was, and they did that. And he felt calmed down. He was worried. And at the same time, I was very frank with him about what our portfolio looked like. In fact, they were different in some ways, and we swapped stories as to what we thought might be the best way to go, but neither one of us changed very much, but he knew what we looked like, and we knew what he looked like. My thought is that if friends can, on those levels, exchange information openly, freely, without embarrassment, they're pretty good friends. Jim Roach was a dear friend, and I miss him deeply.
I will give you just since I'm not here in an academic capacity, I'll give you a little background and context for this point. My father, as Dr. Freeman mentioned, was a professor emeritus of government. He retired many years ago because he was a number of years older than Jim. I think maybe 15, maybe more, not exactly sure. My father passed away in 2007. So he and Jim were colleagues, but they also became friends, as so many people, clearly from listening and talking to you here this evening, so many people did. Jim was a wonderful person. And perhaps because he was not married, I'm not sure, but it seemed like he was around our house a lot. And so I saw a good deal of him when I was growing up. And I have many, many fond memories of those years. But if you remember your childhood, you know that when you're a child and even a teenager, often your awareness of your parents and what they're doing and the adults around you can be pretty hazy. And certainly mine, that's true with Jim. Even though we kept in touch all these years at Christmas with cards and notes and very occasional phone conversations, there are many things I have learned this evening and when I read the obituary about Jim that I didn't know. I thought he always made his trips to India under the auspices of the university, and I had no idea that he was cultural attaché. So there's much that is very fuzzy in my memory, and it's in a way still the way I think of Jim is somehow a little bit trapped back in those childhood years. I'm an artist and a poet, and when Jim died, my way of dealing with my grief was to write this poem a few days after his death. And it is based on those childhood memories and my love for Jim. Indian Jim. Jim is gone now, slipped away into the invisible darkness that moves along beside all of us. A man unmarried and with only one brother, somewhat older. He lived alone, yet his life was rich and full for long years. He brought me intriguing tokens from India, that exotic place where he traveled many times, placing into my small hands intricate elephants carved from bone, golden elephants striding across thin silk, and elephants, lotus blossoms, and cobras on the tips of tiny silver spoons. As I listened to his tales, my imagination bloomed with colors, sights, and sounds that may not have been real in fact, but were real for me, lying awake later in the dark and seeing people washing in the Ganges, the women in brilliant silks, the bronzed men in white, and always in the distance, half hidden by dust or smoke, the elephants watching the people and waiting. Now I see Jim in American clothes, yet looking so very Indian, walking behind the screen of dust with the elephants, a lotus blossom in his lapel, and cobras at his feet.
Thank you, Gary. Good afternoon, or good evening. I'm one of many former students of Jim Roach. I took his U.S. foreign policy course in 1966, I think it was. And then the following year, worked as his grader, along with Ed Dorn, who were classmates. I then went off to grad school, where I met Gary Freeman 40 years ago, and eventually became a professor of international relations myself. So Jim was actually one of my first academic mentors. And I'd like to tell you just one brief story. It's a more recent story. In March of 2009, USC gave me an award for helping undergraduate students, and they asked me to write a little statement about mentoring. And when I thought about that, I thought it's really a process that establishes a network of relationships across generations, with one passing on ideas to the next and then on to the next. And I ended this little statement saying, in fact, I'm in touch with a few of my mentors, and I'm going to be seeing one of them in Austin in June. And Jim and I did have a wonderful visit last June of '09. We had lunch and went back to his house. And I told him this little image I had of the network across the generations, and he said, yes, that's right. I remember my mentor. Just as I was writing that statement in March, I got an email from a woman in Sacramento who had been the first USC student for whom I had been honors thesis supervisor. And she said, I'm coming for my 25th class reunion, and I wonder if I could come see you. So now she is mentoring other people and probably passing along a little of Jim Roach. Thank you, Jim.